Hi, this is Duke Ralston from the Reaper's Digest. I want to thank you for listening to the show, and I wanted to ask you to buy the Reaper's Digest a cup of coffee. Just go to Ko-fi.com/tennessemacabre and send us a tip. Thank you again.
Hey, everybody. All right, I'm Blake Ray. And this.
Okay.
Hey, Duke, how you doing?
And I'm Duke Ralston of Reaper's Digest. How about you?
I'm good, brother. I'm good. Drinking a beer, reading scary stories.
Me too, my friend. What kind of beer are you drinking tonight, Blake?
I got a Classic City Lager. Let's see, hold it up to the
Oh,
camera.
yeah.
Label out, always.
Okay.
Brewed in Athens, Georgia, my hometown for a long time. Until I moved to Marietta. Hey, she was pretty, you know?
Yeah, I understand. I actually worked a job in Athens one time when I worked for an environmental firm. I drove an 18-wheeler there onto a Navy base and converted about 20 sailors to Christianity in a heartbeat. I am drinking Truck Stop Honey. It's a honey brown ale brewed in Gadsden, Alabama.
Awesome. How is it?
It's wonderful. It's I like brown ales anyway, but I like to drink brown ales when I've got to do something where I need to be conscious. My normal drink of choice is an IPA or a stout, and IPAs will rock your world, and stouts can be pretty strong too. A honey brown ale, I can drink 2 or 3 of those and work and talk and be just fine, you know. So that's why I chose it. And this one is really good. It's got a little bit of a sweet taste. Of course, it's a honey brown ale. And I actually used this when I started using this to cook with because it goes really well with beef. So like I make a pot roast or shepherd's pie, this is what I cook it in.
Really? So cooking tips from Duke.
Cooking tips from Duke, yeah.
I find I like a lager in with Mexican food.
Oh yes.
Cook the stuffing with cinnamon, a lager, and a little bit of lime.
Good. That's good stuff. Good. I love lagers. I mostly drink lagers in the summertime, but I like an ice cold lager when it's nice and hot outside. You know, good stuff.
Oh, lawnmower beer.
Oh, lawnmower beer. That's exactly right.
All right. So what are we talking about today?
We're talking about H.P. Lovecraft and the Call of Cthulhu.
Probably his best-known work, right?
Yes.
I mean,
right.
No argument with that.
There's argument with that because it's kind of foundational to the Lovecraft mythos. I mean, it's where the mythology is. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's called, colloquially, the Cthulhu mythos.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
It absolutely starts here.
And this is where you get here. It starts here, and then you get a little bit more in the Necronomicon. There was a short story he wrote that was kind of comedic. It was intended to be kind of comedic. It was some of his other stuff, but it was sort of a history of the Necronomicon. and it does round out some of the notes. But this is the foundation of the whole Cthulhu mythos.
Yeah, and this was published in, let's see, I believe it was 1926. It was written and then published in 1928. Is that correct?
I think you're absolutely right on that. It was written. I know it was written in 26.
Yeah. And it actually was originally rejected by Weird Tales, which is weird.
That is weird. But if you stop and think about it, nothing, I don't know of anything like the Call of Cthulhu that was ever published before. So that editor was taking a risk, I think, when he agreed to publish it. This was kind of one of those things. This was truly a weird tale.
Oh, yeah. It was, and I think I said this to you before when we were talking about Lovecraft. It was a jump from, what if there was a spooky skeleton to what if there is no God and the real God hates you?
Yes.
Which is a much more fundamentally frightening idea,
Absolutely.
What if everything you know is wrong?
Mm-hmm. He even says, one of the things I outlined that interested me, he talked a lot about the Theosophist. And the Theosophists have guessed at the awesome grandeur of the cosmic cycle wherein our world and human race form transient incidents. They've hinted at strange survivals in terms which would freeze the blood if not masked by bland optimism. And so the Theosophist had this kind of optimistic outlook. I mean, it's totally a cult practice, and it was different from the mainstream religions, but it was very important in the 20s. And he's saying these guys, they kind of know what they're talking about, but it's way darker than they realize.
Yeah. I mean, the first thing he says, right? The beginning.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When you get into, because this is, I guess we should do a little bit of a summary, right?
Yeah, let's do that. That's a good idea.
Yeah. So basically, and then I'll get back to the point I was about to make because that was going to take a minute.
Okay.
And as we go along, you'll get used to. Oh no, he's ramping up. But
I do.
Yeah. Oh, good. There's two of them. But it's presented as a manuscript found among the papers of the late Francis Wayland Thurston of Boston, right?
Yes.
And it's a manuscript in 3 parts. The first part is about Francis Wayland Thurston and how he starts looking into the papers of his late great uncle, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So in these papers are all these clippings and stories of the Cthulhu cult,
Mm-hmm.
but mostly they're centered around a small sculpture, which he describes as being equal parts dragon, cuttlefish, human. It's the image we've all come to know and love, the cuttlefish head, the, big wings, the big claws, right? And how the sculptor, Wilcox, goes insane, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The second part, and we're basically following someone on their descent into madness.
Yes.
Would you agree?
I agree, absolutely.
Yeah. So the second part is the tale of Inspector LaGrasse. That's about a Louisiana. What is he?
He's an inspector in
police
New
officer.
Orleans, I believe.
Yeah. I was wondering if he was a sheriff, but he's a police officer.
He's a police officer, yeah.
Police inspector.
Mm-hmm.
And he breaks up a cult meeting, which is suspected to be voodoo, but is revealed to be something much, much darker, involving human sacrifice and an idol of unknown origin, which matches the the bas relief, the little clay piece. And then the final piece, entitled "The Madness from the Sea," is a story of Gustav Johansen, a Norwegian sailor whose crew overtakes a group of let's call them cultists. They're like kind of crazed. Yeah.
Cultists.
It's a lot more generous than the phrasing that Lovecraft used. But he overtakes them, they kill them, then they follow their trajectory only to find themselves face to face with the great Cthulhu,
Right.
Now, what I think is interesting here is that there is something so nihilistic about the story.
Yes.
You were saying that the Theosophists were basically optimistic, right?
Right. They're basically optimistic. And there's a lot we can talk about with Theosophy. We'll come back to that in a moment. But it is a religion that is, it is a revealed religion, and it's profoundly influenced by Eastern philosophy and reincarnation. And one of the things that Madame Blavatsky talks about is these cities that were lost in great cataclysms and go below the sea, like Lemuria and Atlantis, and they have real knowledge about these places and root races that established each one. But it's a very optimistic. When she was alive, she was making converts in New York and London. I mean, it's not an apocalyptic cult or anything like that.
No.
And
Doomsday's cults don't last.
They don't. Yeah, that's right. They kind of have an end date on them.
Yeah.
Theosophy lasted a long time and was very potent in the 1920s, and it was probably at its height in the 1920s, and it was all the rage in New York, and it was all the rage in Berlin, which is where Hitler and the Nazis picked up on it. And when you watch Indiana Jones and the Nazis are going all over the world hunting these artifacts, that really happened, and they were attempting in part to prove some of the things that Blavatsky talked about with archaeology. So after World War II and its association with Nazis was kind of the death knell for Theosophy. I mean, it still exists. There's still people that follow it, but it's nothing like it was in the 20s. And I think Lovecraft looked at this and said, and Lovecraft, this was a dark dude, okay? But he looked at that and he said, these guys, number one, he kind of poo-poos their revealed knowledge. He says they're guessing. And everything in Theosophy sort of depended on Madame Blavatsky and others receiving revealed knowledge from the gods. And he poo-poos that right out of the gate. He says they're guessing at it. He says they sort of guessed correct, but it's far worse than anything they think. And I think that's really kind of a neat way to begin a mythos. Yeah.
Well, if you look at the Horror in Clay, the first part of this 3-part, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He says, and I'm quoting directly here, the most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents.
Mm-hmm.
We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far. I mean,
that's
that's
a heck of a quote.
Yeah. Yeah, that's quite the opening to a mythos too.
Yeah, that's a heck of a quote, and he builds on that. And this is something that plays in my mind, because I do believe that writers and musicians, I believe that artists tap into something. And Lovecraft and Robert E. Howard, who wrote it at the same time, they tap into a darkness that I think, they're trapped between, that time that they wrote in is trapped between World War I and World War II. They're trapped between two great evils. And a lot of times in this country, we don't think a whole lot about World War I, because our involvement was fairly limited. It's over quickly for us. But World War I was far worse than World War II was. So, and Lovecraft would have been in touch for that. As a matter of fact, he volunteered for service but was denied.
Why was he denied?
So, I didn't get the exact reason. I think his aunts basically got him deferred. They didn't want him going, and I'm not 100% certain about that. I just read one quote. They never gave a real good. Yeah, they never gave a real good explanation. They never gave anything that was ironclad. They hinted that his aunt, he was the only male relative, his aunts got him out of the service against his wish. He did, interestingly enough, he believed that World War I was a waste, because he did not believe that the Teutonic Anglos should be warring with Teutonic Germans and Scandinavians. He thought they should be working together to face the people of Asia and the people, the Mongolian Central Europeans, what he called the Mongolian Central Europeans. It was a very race-driven view of the world. And, as someone who's born in the South, we tend to think, we see race in terms of black and white. That's a Southern thing, particularly in the rural South. But Lovecraft was, he was into Anglo-American. If you weren't English, it was a problem. I read some of the things he wrote about the Irish that were just horrible. And we don't think about the Irish as being a separate race, but he did. So, and we have to remember at this time period, the British Empire was the most powerful empire on the planet, or at least it was billed as the most powerful empire on the planet. And the United States was a close second. So he was definitely into the Anglo-American centric view of the world. So.
And I mean, that's always the elephant in the room when you're talking about Lovecraft.
Mm-hmm.
The dude was xenophobic.
Yes.
Sexist.
Yes.
Racist.
Yes.
I'm going to go ahead and say probably homophobic, but, I don't know if he ever weighed in. I'm going to guess he probably was.
I would guess that he probably was as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
But he, his friend of mine said he didn't even like other white people. He was very much, his racism extends past simple racism to cultural centric. He did not like the Irish. He did not like the Scots. He didn't like the Welsh. He was an Anglophile, and I don't know how he felt about the French, but I'm
going to guess he wasn't a fan.
I'm going to guess he probably wasn't either. But the Anglo-Saxons, the Germans, the Scandinavians, he considered that. with the Aryan, what Hitler called the Aryans, that was definitely. I mean, he would have had a lot of. He would have found a lot of common ground with Hitler. So,
oh, yeah. So that's the guy we're talking about, and now let's talk about what a genius writer was. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, and that's kind of the thing you have to do, and in my opinion, and we were talking about this today. You can either say Lovecraft was a horrible racist, and you're right, and I'm not going to read his stuff, which I think is a terrible loss. You can say Lovecraft was a horrible racist. I'm going to use that as a historical marker, and that tells me about the time and the culture he was writing in. Or you can say, you can try to defend what he's saying, which I know there are people that will, but I'm not one of them.
No, I'm not.
I tend to go in for let's read Lovecraft and let's use it as a historical marker. That what Lovecraft writes tells us a lot about America in the 1920s.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's worth reading for that purpose. Same with Gone with the Wind. It doesn't tell you a thing about the Civil War, but it tells you about Atlanta in the 20s and 30s.
Yeah. The thing about Lovecraft, though, is he was also classist, and I think a lot of this sort of stems from what we could probably say was undiagnosed mental health issues.
Yes.
Yeah, the dude was not well. Like, no. And if you read his stories, creeping madness.
Yes.
That is an underlying. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I didn't mean to interrupt. There's a little bit of lag time. I don't mean to interrupt, and it's I think he was profoundly influenced by his father's madness.
Mm-hmm.
And his father had syphilis, and late-stage syphilis is accompanied by madness.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think when you read about his background, I mean, this dude was, he was publishing astronomy magazines when he was in junior high school.
Mm-hmm.
He was editing astrology. I mean, the guy was a certified genius, but there was something there that's just not fun. And he's a certified, but he never really completes high school.
Yeah.
And going to college, and is one of the best writers I've ever read.
Well, you look at his.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you look at his work, and it's just so meticulous. There's an attention to detail. Like, okay, so probably one of the greatest American writers is Edgar Allan Poe.
Yes.
And we all know what Poe wrote. Weird fiction.
Yeah. Yes.
Weird fiction, weird poetry, right?
Yeah. Yes.
And we're using the term weird fiction the way that Weird Tales used it, as a sort of blanket term for genre, horror, right. Sci-fi, gothic.
Mm-hmm.
But Poe outlines in one of his reviews exactly what the Weird Tale should do. He was reviewing Hawthorne, who is another great writer,
Mm-hmm.
So he says, about halfway through this very rambling review, where he pretty much just decides that he's going to, pontificate on the state of writing. He says, a skillful literary artist has constructed a tale. If wise, he has not fashioned his thoughts to accommodate his instance, but having conceived with deliberate care a certain unique or single effect to be wrought out. He then invents such incidents. He then combines such events as may best aid him in establishing the preconceived effect. If his very initial sentence tend not to be the outbringing of this effect, then he has failed in his first step. In the whole composition, there should be no word written of which the tendency, direct or indirect, is not to the one pre-established design. And I think, in a way, this story exemplifies that.
Yeah. Yeah.
The very first piece of writing, under the title and the name, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Is found among the papers of the late Francis Wayland Thurston of Boston, which gives us two things, right? From a literary standpoint. Mm-hmm. It allows us to use the first person,
yeah,
but without the removal of tension that the first person usually gives.
Yes.
Because think about it. Like, usually if it's in the first person, you're like, okay, well, obviously you survived to tell the story. In this case, mm-hmm. He says, yeah, he didn't. He didn't make it.
Yeah. No. We don't know whether he died or he went star mad, but we think he probably died. Oh, you're talking about Wayland didn't make it. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
We know that. Yeah.
We also know why. Why did he not make it? Because he knew too much. Because he did exactly what you as a reader are doing.
Yep.
He read the notes and learned too much. So it mm-hmm. weirdly makes the story kind of dangerous.
It does. I never thought about that, but yeah.
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 So that displacement of the tension onto the reader, I think, is just mm-hmm. masterful. You know, and that idea yes. that Poe had, that you have to use every moment of it to get there. Well, he did, mm-hmm. you know?
Mm-hmm.
So.
That's one of the things I like about this story. It's a short story, but it's dense. You couldn't edit anything out of this. There's in that doesn't, like you say, there's nothing in it that doesn't lead to the end.
Exactly. And a story in 3 parts could easily, you mm-hmm. could usually, you know, I've worked with a lot of writers where you could go, hey, you know, we don't need like the middle, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
We could do without yes. like that whole beginning, you know? Mm-hmm. But in this, it all drives. Yes. It's like a good rock song, you know? It's all driving towards yes. that end.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's one of the things that I noticed about it. And usually when you have a story, I've tried to write stories that in first person. And I can't do it. It usually comes out boring. But this moves, and it moves and shakes, and there's not a minute in it that is anything like boring. I think I was telling you the other day that I had read some story or some critique somewhere that said that he really wasn't all that good a writer, but I think he very, very, the words he uses, the amount of wording he uses, the fact that he writes this in the first tense, and the scene where they come up on the ceremony in the swamps, mm-hmm. it almost has a beat. I mean, when writing action, sometimes I'll sit down and I'm writing an action, and John hit hit Dwayne right between the eyes, and Dwayne fell backwards, and he got up with, I mean, I have to go back and reword it because sometimes it just looks contrived and it's not there. But this thing where the police come up on that ceremony, it's almost like poetry. I mean, it boom, 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 and I mean, he moves right through the paragraph.
Speaking of which, have you ever read Lovecraft's poetry?
I have, and
he was
I
not
used
good
to be
at everything.
He
was not good at everything. Elliot, yeah. He was not.
No, he's definitely a prose writer. Yeah.
Oh yeah, but he's got that sense of the way language works.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And the way timing works.
Mm-hmm.
To hold something together. There's a moment. Let's see if I can find it in the text.
Okay.
When he's talking about coming up on the there it is. He's talking about coming up on this ceremony, right?
Yes.
And he says, then the men, having reached a spot where the trees were thinner, came suddenly in sight of the spectacle itself. 4 of them reeled, 1 fainted, and 2 were shaken into a frantic cry, which the mad cacophony of the orgy fortunately deadened. Legrasse dashed swamp water on the face of the fainting man, and all stood trembling and nearly hypnotized with horror. In a natural glade of the swamp stood a grassy island of perhaps an acre's extent, clear of trees and tolerably dry. On this now leaped and twisted a more indescribable horde of human abnormality than any but a Siam or an Angora could paint. Void of clothing, this hybrid spawn were braying, bellowing, and writhing about a monstrous ring-shaped bonfire, in their center of which, revealed by occasional rifts in the curtain of flame, stood a great granite monolith, some 8 feet in height, on top of which, incongruous with its diminutiveness, rested the noxious carven statuette. From a wide circle of tin scaffolds set up in regular intervals with the flame-girt monolith as a center hung, head downward, the oddly marred bodies of the helpless squatters who had disappeared. It was inside this circle that the ring of worshippers jumped and roared, the general direction of the mass motion being from left to right, in endless bacchanal between the ring of bodies and the ring of fire. Now tell me that's not basically a prose poem.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. Prose poem.
Yeah. He was a poet, but he couldn't work in verse.
It has a definite rhythm and a beat. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, he was there's a moment there, right? Because he's talking about maybe 10 seconds.
Yes.
But you know, if you've ever been in a car wreck, and I've been in a few because I'm terrible at driving.
Yeah.
Just really bad. Like, I shouldn't have a license, but I do, you know?
Uh-huh.
But there's this moment when something really bad is happening where time slows down.
Yes.
And that's what he sort of captures there.
Yes.
Like, you're taking everything in, you're watching it, and you're shocked and horrified.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think that...
See, at the same time, it moves.
Go ahead.
I said at the same time, he captures he captures that where time is moving slowly, but it's very much the feeling of an act. It's a surreal type of everything freezing.
Oh yeah. The surrealism is very distinct in it.
Yes.
Yeah. The surrealism is very distinct. And, you know, we were talking about World War I, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What we don't think about is how much nihilism that brought into the world.
Oh, yeah.
You think about, was it Yeats, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right after World War I, he, W.B. Yeats, he writes the poem, The Second Coming, right?
Oh, yes. Yes.
And you probably can't make it out, but I have it tattooed on my arm. But he writes, the sinner cannot hold.
Mm-hmm.
And it is such an outcry for his generation.
Yes.
You know, things fall apart, the sinner cannot hold. Mere anarchy rules the world.
Mm-hmm.
This is the world that we're talking about, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And in general, Pulp Fiction has been an escape, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And Lovecraft forces you to face it.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Because in his world, everything is evil, and there is a fatalism because you know that the person whose point of view you're getting the story from either is going to die or they're going to go insane.
Absolutely. And it's already happened. There's no fixing it.
No.
You know how we talked about, you know, the first person perspective removes some of the, what would you call it, the suspense, right?
Yes. Right.
Well, he goes entirely the opposite. There's no suspense because we know for sure he's dead.
Yeah.
We know for sure he's insane.
It's like the walk up to the gallows. There, you know where this ends, and there's no way out of the walk. You know.
Yeah. I don't know if I've had quite enough beers to sing you that. Mama, I just killed a man, but.
Oh yes, yes.
Yeah. Oh, well, was that Styx who had the song, The Renegade Who Had a Maid Retrieved for a Bounty?
That was the Wings.
Was it?
Paul McCartney and Wings, yes.
Yeah. That was a good song. We don't, you know, Paul, you know, I think Paul McCartney would probably appreciate more questions about Wings.
I think he would too.
You know?
Having,
Look.
you know, it gets a lot of questions about the Beatles, but Wings was really a great group. And I came in, I started listening to adult music about the time when Wings was right before Wings broke up, okay, or right after. Yeah. And so Wings was still a big deal. And it was a huge group in the 70s. I mean, it was a big deal.
You go.
And we wrote a lot of good music.
I remember I was the first music my dad told me to turn the F off was Alice in Chains. So that's to let you know how old I am.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, just turn the F off, you know. Like, mind you, and I was nearly named after the lead singer of Jethro Tull, so.
Oh, well, he got no right to complain.
Right? At least no one played the flute in Alice in Chains.
I know. Gotta love Jethro Tull.
You really do. You know, they were nominated for the first heavy metal Grammy.
They were. I didn't know that.
They won. They beat Metallica.
Oh wow. Yeah.
And they weren't there to accept it because they were like, surely we won't beat Metallica.
Yeah.
So. But what else do we want to say about this story? I mean, I personally, this is one of my favorites. You know, the cultural impact is, it's out there, you know?
It's out there, and this impacts everything from, of course, there's a whole list of movies that fed off of H.P. Lovecraft and Cthulhu. I'm trying to think the Haunted Palace with Vincent Price.
Yeah. Die Monster Die.
Die Monster Die. The Blanchardville Monster? No.
Yes.
That's not it. I'm thinking about
it
is the Blanchardville Monster. Blanchardville Monster. But even Pirates of the Caribbean and Davy Jones. I mean, that is a definite Cthulhu alliteration. Oh. So, I mean, it has. I was thinking before we went on. You take this one little period in time, 1918 to 1938. Let's say 1920 to 1938, and you get these three guys that start writing in here. H.P. Lovecraft, Robert E. Howard, and Tolkien, J.R.R. Tolkien. Mm-hmm. And they are responsible. Any type of fantasy horror book you pick up now, just about is going to have something from Lovecraft. It's going to be written in the style of Tolkien, or it's going to be written in the style of Robert E. Howard. And they really formed that type of literature for a century, almost.
And you got to think about how. Oh yeah. Well, see. This was published in 28. It's 2021.
28. Yeah, 21.
Yeah. Almost so you know, you got to think about how much is really being done at this time. You know. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Cthulhu's become a pop culture icon. Right?
Right.
You know, I you can go get a plush toy.
Yes. Which I don't think Lovecraft would be terribly happy with. You know?
No. And some other time when we've got 5 or 6 hours to kill, we'll have to get into the whole mythos and really piece out who does what.
Yes. And one of the things that I knew from some of my other reading, but I kind of touched on it. Lovecraft actually tutored other writers. One of the names that comes up is Robert Bloch.
Who wrote Psycho, right?
Psycho, yes. He corresponded with Robert E. Howard. And Howard borrowed elements of the Cthulhu mythos for his Conan stories. So you have a lot of back and forth here. So he kind of was a mentor for a lot of writers that were coming up in the late 20s, early 30s. You know,
well, it becomes like this weird mimetic fake religion. You know?
Yeah.
Like, because it's in Bloch, it's in the Conan stories, it's in Derelith's stories.
Right.
It just goes everywhere. Now, Derelith made it very Catholic, but, he put a lot of good and evil in it, which there's not a lot of good and evil in Cthulhu. There's like this horror of existentialism.
Yes.
The idea of
there is no good or evil. Yeah.
Yeah, if we can't grab onto good and evil, what do we have? Well, we have something that looks down at us and says, ants.
Absolutely. and there's also that essence of good and evil. It makes it when you're reading the story, it's hard to get your bearings and it's hard to get a purchase. And it's like, if you sit down and you read a kind of a black and white, let's say a vampire story, let's say Dracula, you got Van Helsing, he's a good guy. You got Dracula, he's a bad guy. In the story, Van Helsing stakes Dracula, everything works out. H.P. Lovecraft, you have that mooring to moor onto. I mean, you're just totally floating out there on a bad acid trip is the best way I can describe it. It's like a bad acid trip,
or a really good one. I don't know. Depends on how much you paid for the acid. But certainly not a fun one.
Not a fun one. Yeah, exactly.
This is not the Yellow Submarine acid trip.
No, that's right. There's something almost psychedelic about reading Lovecraft, and it's not psychedelic in a good way.
No. And, we'll touch on that probably again and again, is the idea of psychedelia in horror. One of my favorite eras of horror is the mid to late 70s.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you got, Satan's Slave, Venus and Furs.
Yes.
It all gets very psychedelic.
It does indeed.
Warhol's Frankenstein.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's that is
out there.
real. Yeah.
So,
but you also get you kind of get a rethinking in the 70s. One of my favorite things that comes out of the late 70s in horror is Salem's Lot. And Salem's Lot, it takes a very old story and puts a new twist on it and modernizes it. You have kind of a vampire population that's growing exponentially in a small town in America, which breathes new life into it takes the old scary B horror movies with Bela Lugosi that aren't really, and all of a sudden they're scary again when that kid's outside floating in the air scratching on the windowsill. So that was a really neat period.
Yeah, now I'm gonna have nightmares.
I'm glad I could help.
Yeah. As if the beers weren't helping. But I mean, and it's interesting we mentioned Salem's Lot because Salem's Lot has that nihilism in it.
It does.
That Lovecraft introduced to horror. Like I said before, what if there was a spooky skeleton? It's not nearly as scary as what if there were things beyond your control that hated you?
Exactly.
Or didn't pity you.
Yeah.
Because even Dracula pities his victims.
He pities his victims. There's a sense of honor. There's a sense of romance between he and Mina. Between he and Lucy, even. There's a sense of love. You don't have that in Salem's Lot. In Salem's Lot, we're cattle.
Oh, yeah. And that's
no
a new idea at the time.
Yeah. It's very neat.
Yeah. And, Stephen King has been very forthcoming about his Lovecraftian influences.
Yes, he has.
Yeah. Salem's Lot is, of course, short for Jerusalem's Lot, which he wrote a short story early on in his career called Jerusalem's Lot, which is about the Lovecraft mythos.
I did not realize that.
Yeah. So, there's also a short story sequel to Salem's Lot.
Mm-hmm. That I knew. It's real good. Yeah, I didn't know about the original Salem's Lot that he wrote early in his career. But the influence. I'm reading Christine right now, and
it's a great story.
It is a great story, and in my opinion, it is the best Stephen King wrote. I love Salem's Lot too. Don't get me wrong.
I'm going to fight you. I'm going to say Carrie.
Oh yeah, Carrie's good too. Carrie's good too. I didn't think about Carrie. Carrie's good too. But I love, Christine, the idea that something so American as a hot rod and a teenager owning a hot rod, and it can turn into demonic possession. I mean, it's incredible. So,
Yeah. It's a great book.
I'm really jumped.
It's a great book.
Mm-hmm.
Well, cheers, Duke.
Cheers, my friend.
All right.
It's been fun.
It's been great. We'll see y'all next time.
Yep.
On Reaper's Digest.
Thanks for tuning in, everybody.
Thank you.